Hello, all, and happy Global Ethics Day 2021. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Helen Partridge, and I'm the Director of Accountancy Education at IFAC. It's my pleasure to moderate this discussion today, featuring 4 board members of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, who are here to discuss ethical leadership in an increasingly complex world and the role of ethics as determined by the IESBA Ethics Code in the accounting profession. Personally, I love the overlap here between the fundamental principles of the code that drive our behavior as professional accountants and the skills and competencies needed to not only apply, but to become confident ethical leaders in our organizations. Let me first turn to and introduce Ms. Caroline Lee, who has been a member of the IESBA board since 2017 and became deputy chair as of January 1st this year. Congratulations. With over 30 years of experience in the public accounting profession, she is currently a partner at KPMG Singapore and the Asia Pacific Head of Quality and Risk Management. Thanks for joining us, Caroline.
Thanks, Helen. Lovely to be here.
A great pleasure to have you. Can I ask you to reflect upon how you see the connection between ethics and the public interest in your opening remarks?
Okay. So in the IESBA code, one thread that we have set out is a self-interest thread. And so when you act ethically, chances are that you will be acting in the public interest. As leaders, we have to set the right tone for our employees and others that we interact with. And so we can't always be putting our interests first and in the forefront. We need to be thinking not just for ourselves, but for our employees, our clients, but also more importantly, in our role as professional accountants, the public at large. So I believe that if I do my best to act ethically, chances are I will be acting in the public interest, whether as a leader or just in anything that I do.
Thank you. So doing the right thing is in the public interest, inherently, I think is what you're saying. Thanks.
Yes.
If I can next turn to Ms. Saadiya Adams. Saadiya is a regulator by trade and serves as the Senior Professional Manager for Standards at the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors in South Africa. She's been on the board since 2017, first as a technical advisor and then as a member. I'm glad you could join us today, Saadiya. Can I ask you for your reflections on the same around how our ethics as professional accountants is connected to the public interest?
Thank you, Helen. We often ponder on questions such as what is fair, what is correct, what is responsible. But for a professional accountant, this is followed by what is fair in the public interest, what is correct in the public interest, and what is responsible in the public interest. And this is because acting in the public interest is integral to the profession. So it's with the consistency of thinking of the public interest with each action and each decision that leads us to fulfill the profession's promise. The IESBA recently had amendments relating to promoting the role and mindset. And in there, it clarified that the fundamental principles and compliance with the requirements of the code enables the professional accountant to meet this responsibility in the public interest.
Fantastic, thank you. Next, I'll turn to Ms. Vania Borgerth, who is new to the board, having joined this year. Vania served as the head of Brazilian Network for Integrated Reporting since 2012 and is a member of the expert panel of Accounting for Sustainability. I've come to know her quite well as she discovered further collaborative initiatives between IESBA board and the IFAC education panel. Vania, thank you for being here. What are your thoughts on ethical leadership and the benefit to stakeholders or the connection again to the public interest?
Well, thank you for welcoming me here, Helen. It's a pleasure to be here and share my thoughts in this sense. I think it is impossible to dissociate ethical behavior and public interest, because if the world was outside and I was the only individual in this aisle, there would be no need for ethical behavior. So ethical behavior is necessary because we live in society. So my rights should be taken in mind in connection to the others one. So ethics is there in order to remind us of that. Remind us of if there is, as Saadiya said, a right and a wrong, and I should compare my own interests to those of the public interest.
Thank you, Vania. And rounding out our panel is Ms. Kim Gibson, who I believe has been in the IESBA family for 12 years now and is a partner at Grant Thornton LLP and the global head of independence for Grant Thornton International. Kim, 12 years working with IESBA is impressive. What do you see as the benefits of ethical leadership to stakeholders in the profession, such as employees, clients, and the communities?
Well, thanks for having me, Helen. And yes, it has been 12 years. I'm on the board now 6 years, and my term ends in December. And it really has been a highlight of my professional career. So when I think about ethical leadership, to me, it really is about people understanding what their core values are and having the conviction to live them in all aspects of their life, whether it's professional or personal, and always with the best intentions and convictions. It may sound a bit obvious, but I think that in order to have ethical leadership, we need to have leaders that have a strong moral compass that's based on positive intent and good works. Ethical leaders should lead by example always, celebrate the accomplishments of others, put the community and the greater good first as opposed to a self-interest. I think leaders really need to be agile, focused, have integrity, empathy, compassion. An ethical leader really needs to share. So I think they need to be teachers and coaches and see the leadership opportunities in others. Leaders should be confident and should be role models. And as an ethical leader, we have the opportunity to really set the tone of an organization, to influence culture, to provide psychological safety to our people, and really to set the same expectations for others. Being a professional accountant, to me, no doubt, the accountancy profession is well suited for these very trying times and can really rise as ethical leaders. We have our code of ethics, we have our fundamental principles. There are independence rules that really set us apart from others. And we can be and should be looked at as trusted professionals. And of course, as my colleagues on the panel have mentioned, there is the public interest. And we really have a responsibility to act in the public interest. Ethical leaders will be viewed as those that safeguard the public interest, which of course would benefit companies, individuals, and hopefully global communities.
Thank you. That strong moral compass that you talk about, it's funny how every accountant I've come across in my career, it's just innate in who we are. It's kind of inherent in who we are as beings. Caroline, playing on that kind of consideration of how an organizational leader can foster like the concept of ethics in their respective organizations, do you think it's is it just something that happens in culture? Is there training that needs to be given? How would you go about that?
I think it has to be holistic, and it starts with the tone at the top. So the leaders in that organization have to set the right tone, and they have to then make sure that there are policies and procedures in place that will support that ethical culture, and continue that with training and education. And let me just give you an example. So an organization could have a hotline reporting channel. But it shouldn't just stop with that hotline reporting channel, which allows employees to speak up when they see something that's unethical. They need to take that further by making sure that any report that comes into that hotline is handled respectfully and investigated objectively. And at the end of the day, if the outcome of the investigation, isn't a pleasant outcome, they have to stand their ground and support in doing the right thing, in being ethical. So it's about taking that step and demonstrating the ethical leadership that everyone else in the organization can see and believe in. It's not just about words and saying it, but acting in a different manner.
So it's not really just the tone at the top is the one aspect, but I think what you're saying, that everybody within the organization has to be an ethical leader. You have to be the one to step in and challenge.
Yes.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Fantastic.
as the leader, you have to create that environment and you have to support that environment.
Great. Thank you. Vania, let me turn to you if I may, please. And that my understanding is that there's a presumption that auditors, because of how we're trained, because of all the things that Kim was talking about, and we have that knowledge of the code of ethics, that we're more inclined to make sound ethical decisions. Do you agree with that presumption, or do you think there's more to it than that?
Well, I don't know if I agree or not, actually, Helen. I think that it is quite interesting hearing Caroline answer for the last question. I agree 100% with her. If the leadership is not ethical, it is very difficult for the lower levels of governance to be ethical. But on the other hand, as she said, and you stressed, even if the leadership is not ethical, it does not excuse the others from being. So sometimes it is within the whole of the employees to show that they do not agree with set of behavior if it is not in accordance to the fundamental principles of an ethical behavior. And yes, you are right in a sense, because auditors are in a very privileged situation, because if you are a preparer, you sometimes just have your own situation in order to compare and have as a reference. But auditors, they have the privilege of meeting very different situations from company to company. And together with the knowledge that they have of the ethical code, they are in a better position in order to make some very clear tasks for them and very clear walls that should not go over and fundamentals for their own behavior and what they will be accepting or not in the companies that they are auditing. You asked if education would take a role in that, because auditors are in general much better prepared in terms of knowledge. Yes, they do not have the excuse of saying, I did not know about that, because as professional accountants, they have a duty to know the ethical code and to live by its principles and practice that. But at the end of the day, education can help to a strong disposition, but it's not the main component. My English is very bad.
Wonderful.
Because if it was that way, we would say that everyone that is well educated would be ethical. And it's not always true. And on the other hand, those who have no education would never be ethical. It's also not true. but education can help to build the pillar of knowledge about being true and not true. So if you are doing something that is wrong, you know it is wrong, because education was there to show it to you, and that the e-code and the ethical code is there to make you realize that as well. So auditors have the responsibility, the public commitment to act in an ethical way. In this sense, yes, I agree.
Thank you. Caroline, did you want to add in?
Yeah, I want to add that I agree with Vania, and just thinking about the code and why we have a code of ethics and why we need a code of ethics. We're all humans. We make mistakes from time to time, some more often than others. But the code is there to guide us and to show us that, this is what we should aim for. This is what we should strive for.
Yeah. I love what you're both saying, and I hadn't really thought about it before in terms of it's not so much an auditor versus preparer is more ethical, but we have I was an auditor for 16 years. We have a breadth of backgrounds and scenarios that we can draw upon it's almost enhancing that skill. So thank you very much. That was a great answers. Saadiya, if I may turn to you. And what do you think auditors and accountants can do to ensure they make good ethical decisions despite especially the current environmental challenges that we have?
Our current environment has introduced rapid change and hasn't given us the luxury of time. How often do we hear our colleagues and friends and us saying we are busier than ever? And this pressure has led us as professional accountants to miss the ethics in decision-making sometimes. So the first thing is to actually acknowledge and look out for the ethics in our professional activities. Thankfully, as Vania and Caroline has just mentioned, it's the balance between education plus experience and context that allows us to make these decisions. The code provides a robust principle-based framework of which we can look to ensure that we are getting those ethical decisions. But things that stand out for mine is, especially during these times, is having an inquiring mind. That is, when thinking critically about the implication of new information and changes in facts and circumstances. It's also important to understand what the new environment is, and that means keeping up with changes, being well-read, keeping up to date with different types of information that's available will help us to consider how this impacts our work and how we manage teams. This also includes keeping up with professional standards, laws, and regulations, and these have been ever-changing in recent times. And then also to make time, even though time pressures are there, to continue professional development needs. So we've had a discussion earlier about education, but education shouldn't stop. It should be continued so that we can maintain and continue to build on our skills and allow our experiences to guide and color what is ethical in these days.
Ongoing education is music to my ears, especially in my role. This may be a question for Vania, but anybody, I guess, in terms of like the current environment with technology and data, I mean, I think I read like lots of data bytes were created last year. How do you see some of the ethical decisions and the needs that change? Like, how does that change as we move into a more technologically based world? Where Vania, you're part of the technology working group for IESBA, right?
Yeah, I have this honor, and technology can be both a tool, but also something very fragile in terms of risk, because there is always the risk of using technology in order to hide, in order to fraud, in order to lack in transparency, or to cause some kind of disruption in the service and production. And so far, we've been contemplating that. But the fact is that technology has enabled us to do lots of works that in the past would be very difficult to be done. In the technology working group, we wrote a paper about complexity and leadership and the difference from complicated. We are so based on technology sometimes that we are become very lazy for something. So we just push buttons and do not take the time in order to learn about that topic that we are processing in our machines. And so I think education can be there in order to make us more reliable and responsible in this sense. But the benefit of technology is immense. And in leadership and bringing the ethical behavior as well, because we, from time to time, we see things as very difficult. And in the past, we would just say it is impossible to be done. And nowadays, we can realize that it is not exactly difficult. It is not complicated. It's just complex. What seems to be very hard for us, it's just the combination of several simple things that can be worked in a very separated way, in a very organized way, with the use of technology in order to bring us to reach better results. And so I think technology is very important. And there is no way we are able to just consider technology impact in the future. It is here to stay.
I agree. I think building on to your point, the fundamentals that we already have, we already know, and kind of considering and evolving that thinking is going to be ever important. So it's a great question. Kim, if I can come to you in another challenging environment that we have. COVID's directly affected all aspects of the accounting profession and every other profession I think we have. And obviously it's great economic and social impact. A lot of news currently around the unethical behaviors that may be occurring. How important in your view will ethics play in addressing post-COVID recovery?
Great question. And of course, the COVID question. So I think in the last, is it 20 months, probably at this point, that COVID has had just a significant impact on everybody's life in all areas of our lives. And for me, it's most definitely the biggest driver of change that I have seen. And I would imagine for many, many viewing. I presume that we are not yet in a post-COVID environment. I'm hoping the worst has passed, but we still are in a time of uncertainty where people are concerned about the future, and uncertainty often can bring on behaviors that are based on self-preservation or self-interest. So we really need to keep that in mind as we continue to hopefully move out of this COVID environment. But as professional accountants, as we've talked about today, we must adhere to the code of ethics. So that's really very helpful in guiding us forward. I also think that as professional accountants, we really need to look at other risks and behaviors that have been escalated because of COVID, and most likely will continue to do so. So when I think about some of those areas, especially in the accounting profession, you know, whether they're internal or external, there are some areas that we really need to take a step back and focus on and think about the right thing to do, just going back to ethics. So a few areas come to mind. One is client acceptance and reacceptance. Obviously, there's been concern about revenues and whether or not professional accountants can reach revenues pre-COVID and greater in some situations. So it's important for us to really look at the clients, the new clients that we're taking in, to make sure that they would have met our standards pre-COVID, and even our continuing clients. You know, many organizations have had a very difficult 20 months, 2 years, and how do we look at them? Yes, we want to help, but ultimately, are these the clients that we want to bring in? Can we provide services? Do we have the capabilities to provide certain services? So I guess looking at quality in your client base and quality in the services that you would provide to clients, not necessarily focusing on that revenue line. You know, junk goes in, junk comes out, and there are quite a lot of ramifications that could be in store if we're not really focusing on the right clients for professional accountants. Another area, Vania touched upon it when talking about technology, is of course cybersecurity. And over the last, 20 months, 2 years, the activity that we have seen every time we kind of open the paper, there are cyber breaches and cyber threats everywhere. And with COVID, with us all working across the globe, primarily in a virtual environment, there is real opportunity for some bad actors to come in and cause havoc. So I do think that professional accountants do need to be aware. They need to take action where they can to help mitigate the threats, and frankly, to provide our people with a safe work environment, even if it's virtual. So cyber is really an issue that is on everybody's, I would imagine, risk register and concerns, but it's something that's not going to go away and probably become more and more challenging. One of the panelists earlier hit upon the changing and complex regulatory environment. And even in the midst of COVID, that has not stopped regulations and standards from being issued. So even the IESBA has issued 2 new standards, one on non-assurance services, the other on fees, that will be effective the end of next year. And they're complex, and they will take time for professional accountants to understand the issues. So I think a lot of this change and complexity really can take away some of the focus in professional accountants. So I think going back to the fundamental principles again of professional competence and due care to ensure that professional accountants understand the changes, whether it's at a global level or a local level. And finally, and at least in my mind, one of the most important things is, of course, our people's mental health and well-being. That is one of the biggest issues, I think, coming out of COVID, and really where, if we bring it back again to ethical leadership, there's a real connection. So it's important to acknowledge that we're not out of COVID yet, and people continue to be worried about their health, their family's health, their colleagues' health, whether or not they have a job or not. And for professional accountants and the profession in general to really acknowledge that and continue providing support in those areas. So I think overall, it's really for professional accountants to continue to make really good decisions as we come out of COVID, if you will. Professional accountants need to keep the fundamental principles always front of mind, and really to take the time to identify possible threats, areas of concern, and take action to mitigate any wrongdoing.
I love what you said about mental health. I mean, it's so much easier to recognize a threat, and it's so much easier to challenge when you are in a good mental state, right? Just out of curiosity, Kim, what do you do to maintain your mental health?
That's a bit of a loaded question.
Maybe I'll come back to that one.
No, it's okay. I really do. I've been learning as I've gone along. You know, in the beginning of COVID, I think, especially having a team and being an organization where the change was constant, I think I was just kind of going and going and going. And more recently, I've taken a step back and just try to be more present, to really try to determine what's important in life. I think as many of us have in these situations, and take a deep breath a little bit. So that has helped me move forward. Is just kind of turning the volume down a little bit.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Caroline.
Yes, Helen, thanks. I wanted to pick up on some of the things that Kim mentioned, and top of mind is mental health, and mental health of ourselves and those that we work with. So one of our fundamental principles is professional competence and due care. So it's not just about learning, but then maintaining that ability to deliver quality work. And in a COVID situation, we have to think about the impact of mental health and well-being on our people, because that impacts their professional competence and the due care that they exercise in carrying out their work. So as ethical leaders, it is our responsibility to check in and make sure that our team, as Kim mentioned, that they are that they're well, and encourage them to speak up if they are not. I mean, if you look at us now, we are in each other's homes, but it's still difficult to know exactly what each one of us is feeling, and what's really in the back of our minds. So there is a need as an ethical leader to really make that extra effort in the current circumstances to connect with your teams, and to identify if there's any issues that they might have or any help that they might need. So I think that's really important.
Great. How do you connect with your team? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Helen. I was just going to add, based on what Caroline was saying, it made me think, during 2020, there really was an effort, at least in my organization, to acknowledge that people are working from home. So there's babies on conference calls and there's dogs barking in the background, and that just kind of became the norm. And we try to be as accommodating to each other as possible. We're still working like that, but I think because now it's almost the norm, that maybe we forget a bit about what really is happening in the background, because things have gone relatively, okay. So I think it's important for us not to forget that we still are working from home, and there still are babies and there's still dogs barking, and just to be kind to each other and graceful with each other, because it's still difficult. It's definitely still difficult.
Yeah. Vania, let me turn to you.
Thank you. I agree with Kim and Carolina, and I was hoping to complement exactly what Kim has just added. We are dealing with ethical code for accountants, and as accountants, our main obligation is to report the effects of transaction and facts over a company. But as a result of this pandemic, we tend to believe that the economic impact was the greater one, and it was not. The social impact is much more important. There are many unemployed, and there are many circumstances that was used to be ignored in the past and no longer can be ignored. And as Kim said, we were flexible enough to adapt to many things as a result of this pandemic. why not to make use of this opportunity in order to give another step and change our behavior in many other things and bring sustainability to within our companies, to within our houses, and to help the world to be better in the future. So the social aspect was never so valued before. And we should make use of this opportunity to bring some fundamentals in order to preserve this conscience.
Couldn't agree more. Saadiya, I saw you had your hand up. Do you have any other thoughts?
So I have a similar thought to Vania, because there's opportunity and a silver lining. We started off this conversation talking about what kind of threats we should be looking out for, but there's so much. We just had a conversation about mental health, about communication, about being kind, touching in with our colleagues. And that was all relevant pre-COVID. We're just more conscious of it. And that is what one of the things that we can see as the learnings from this experience. I think that if we take all these great things that we've already unpacked into the future, we'll just be stronger for it. Yeah.
Agree. It's funny, I hear the saying that the accountants can save the planet, right? And to me, I believe it's like the integrity, the ethics that we have and the skills that we have with new knowledge, which we're always learning, like constantly learning. That is what allows us to do the social impact, to move into the different areas that I think the planet and the world now needs us to be doing. This is a great conversation. Thank you. So I guess in our last kind of few minutes, actually, there was one other question that came across. And Caroline, if I can start with you and anyone else who has any other thoughts, with some examples, where'd it go? Some examples of less obvious ethical areas that are covered by the code, other than the obvious ones like bribery, corruption, modern slavery, etc. And it came from Russell Cullingworth.
Mm-hmm. So pressure is one, and so if you are a professional accountant in business, you are under pressure to maybe report the financials in a certain manner, especially with the COVID situation. And if you think about it, companies there have been situations where companies or employers have been given certain funds to make sure that their employees can continue to work. And so, as a professional accountant in business, you might be under pressure to retain that money and use it for other purposes. Or maybe at the end of the day, the pandemic wasn't that bad and didn't impact your organization to the extent that was expected. But did you think of returning the money to the government, or finding some other use for it? Did you put up your hand to say, we don't need this, maybe some other organization needs it more? So the code would actually require professional accountants to think about integrity, to think about objectivity, to think about professional behavior, professional competence and due care, and confidentiality.
What about anything on self-review? So I guess go ahead, Saadiya.
Sorry, I was going to actually mention the inducement section in the code. So the inducement section in the code looks at if there is an intent of an action or an item to change your professional behavior. And it starts off with things like a very lavish dinner, a gift, sponsorship, appointments that are being done. And it kind of tells a story of how bribery and corruption starts, because it doesn't start off with the conversation. It actually starts off with small acts and small conversations. So I thought that section of the code really did touch on day-to-day things that we should be looking out for.
Fantastic, thank you. So I guess in our last few minutes here, and I'm going to ask each of you to reflect on some of the actions you're personally taking in your organization to understand the importance of ethics. And what advice would you offer to our audience to become stronger ethical leaders? And Kim, if maybe I can start with you.
Sure. I just think it's really important to have, as a leader and trying to be an ethical leader, to have an open dialogue with your team, with the folks within your organization, and even at home with your family and friends, that everybody is comfortable enough to know that their voices are important, that your voices are heard. I think it's important for us as leaders to share not only our successes, but our challenges. There are a lot of lessons learned in things that don't always go the way that you planned. And in order to share those learnings with others really can be quite important and quite substantial. For myself, I think having a pledge to continue to learn and evolve to the best leader I can be. And just going back again to the virtual workforce, as I mentioned, let's not forget we're still have some challenges there. And it's also important, I think, for us to take care of ourselves. That's why you put that oxygen mask on first on the airplane, is because if you're not well, you can't help the person next to you. So although it might seem selfish, I think really taking the time to make sure that you're okay and your needs are met so that you actually can be supportive and helpful to somebody else.
Thank you. Saadiya, any thoughts from you?
Kim's put it brilliantly. Strong ethical leaders are supported by strong ethical teams. So cultivate the environment where ethical decisions and these tough conversations are not only allowed, but encouraged. I would add on to that don't underestimate your influence. You don't have to be called a leader to be a leader. And this can be social media or otherwise. But that's a double-edged sword, right? Because if you don't walk the talk, then you are going to be looked on in an unfavorable light. But if you provide some kind of context that inspires someone, whether today or tomorrow or in the future, and someone can recognize themselves in your message, then it will create a great footprint to get a lot of people on the right page. Thank you.
Fantastic. Vania, what actions are you going to be taking? What advice would you have?
Well, I think that I will endorse Saadiya's word right now. I think that one of the things that we miss quite a lot during this pandemic time is the opportunity of being a team, because we are so far from each other's right now. We just meet online, and we are much more task doers than fellows, than colleagues, than co-workers. So I miss quite a lot, because I think that being part of a team help us to act in an ethical way, because the example of the others, the strength of the others help us to be aware of what is good and what is not. And I would finish inviting those who had never had a look at our ethical code to do so, because it is not complex. It is not a very formal document. As Caroline said, it's just some kind of reminders of small things that on the day-to-day we tend to forget that they are important. So the code will help us to bring it all to the surface.
Thank you. And Caroline, if I can turn to you as well and ask you the actions and the advice, but I'm also going to add on one other question. What's your vision of the accountants 5 years from now on World Ethic Day 2026?
Okay, I'm a little bit pessimistic. I'm not sure how our profession will fare in 5 years' time. As Kim said, there's a lot of regulation that we are facing, and a lot of challenges. So maybe we can open up that question, Helen, to the rest as well.
We will. In terms of actions and advice, what would you offer?
Okay. In terms of actions and advice, I would say, we each and every one of us have to take the stand that ethics begins with me. And as Saadiya mentioned, if you don't demonstrate it, you don't live it, and then nobody's going to be following and doing the same thing. So I would observe the fundamental principles, and they're really easy. They're not just for accountants. Integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. They're really easy to understand, and use those fundamental principles to guide you in your decisions, in your actions. I personally would continue to be a champion and an advocate for the IESBA code because I truly believe in it. And whenever I come across examples of ethical behavior, I hope to acknowledge that. And when I see unethical behavior, I hope to speak up and challenge that behavior as well. And I hope that others will do the same.
Thank you, Caroline. Kim, are you a pessimist or you're an optimist about, is it the world of ethics for accountants in 5 years?
There you go. I think I'm an optimist. I do think that, the profession will continue to evolve. It will continue to meet challenges head on. I truly believe that the profession in general is, the safeguarding of the public interest. I truly believe that the public interest is primary and paramount to the profession. And I also think that the fundamental principles that we currently have will last the test of time. Maybe some tweaking might be needed here or there as things change, but the fundamental principles I believe will really bring us through to the next 5 years and perhaps beyond.
Thanks, Kim. How about Vania? Pessimist or optimist?
Optimist, always. Yeah. Accountancy will save the world, right?
There we go.
I think that in the future, accountants will be able to help sustainability reports to grow in quality and reliability. So I think I have a very good view of our profession in the future.
And Saadiya, are you a pessimist or an optimist?
Can I go with being a realist? I don't think it's going to be easy. There's so many, we live in a complex environment with complicated things. And Vania will explain to me the difference between the two. But we have a strong bedrock, and we are a profession of excitement, of ingenuity, of integrity. And with those kind of ingredients, it's very hard to stop us, right? So I'm team leaning towards optimism.
I love it. So me personally, I'm an optimist. I think our foundations that we have in both ethics and education, and then the ongoing lifelong learning that we all need to, the evolution, I think is what's going to carry us into new, exciting areas. But I'm also fearful that if we don't take that challenge, and it is going to be hard, absolutely, Saadiya is right. It's going to be hard, but if we don't do it, somebody else will. And that movement is what will cause some problems for our profession, I believe. That's my own personal take on that. Well, thank you so much to Caroline, to Saadiya, Vania, and Kim for joining me in today's conversation. I think we had a lot of great insights from the group of ethical leaders in their own rights, need to remain vigilant and continue to maintain and even evolve our skills and our thinking as situations around us change. Thank you to the audience for joining us, and I hope today's discussion has sparked some thoughts about how to build upon the principles in the code and evolve your own skills and competencies in becoming confident ethical leaders in your own organization. I think the fundamental principles of the code and additional materials from IESBA, such as the Ethical Leadership in an Era of Complexity and Digital Changes paper, combined with the foundational skills and competencies of the education standards, provide us with a great basis or bedrock, as Saadiya said. And what better day to reflect on such than Global Ethics Day 2021. So thank you again and take care.